Larry, I want to start with you. Play a little game, Goldilocks. If it's too hot, too cold, or just right, how did the Fed get it this week?
I don't think that it was sensible to have a G7 meeting talking all about global cooperation, conclude with no acts of global cooperation, and 2 hours later have the Fed act unilaterally. I think the Fed, by moving 50 basis points out of sequence when there wasn't a meeting, something that was virtually without precedent. It's only happened 2 or 3 times in the last quarter century. They left the impression that they must be alarmed about something, so people outside the Fed should be alarmed as well. That's not their mandate to calm things down. And they raised the concern about the efficacy of their tool. They only had 150 basis points left, if that. They dissipated 50 basis points, plus all the extra noise around moving between meetings, and they didn't really do anything that stabilized markets, which were falling faster after they acted than they did before. And so they would have been much better advised to move more slowly, to use their tool as a kind of sword of Damocles. Now they've fired off much of their weapons to no evident effect, and that can't make people feel better about the situation that we're in. So it was not a particularly good week for the Fed. And in addition, they have to have reinforced concerns that they're not entirely independent in their decision-making of the president. I'm not saying that's the case, but by taking an unsuccessful large action right after he demanded it, there has to have been some impact.
Yeah,
so
Dambisa,
not a good week for the Fed.
By the way, the president's reaction was, that's not enough.
Yes, he was very swift off the gun. Larry, hi there. I just wanted to pick up on your points and maybe ask you for a bit more perspective. In terms of directionality, it sounds like you agree that, ultimately we needed a cut. I just wonder, it seems to be you're quibbling around the magnitude. I wonder also if you could comment after you talk about whether it should have been 25 basis points on what you think the next step or might be from the Fed, given what has subsequently happened. Do you think that they're going to wait to see more numbers from the economy, or do you think at the scheduled meeting they will react given what's happening in the markets now?
I think when you have only so many bullets, you have to be very, very careful in their use. And sometimes a weapon in reserve is much more potent than a weapon fired off to no great effect. So I think 25 basis points would have been better. My guess is that given what they've done, they're likely to find it hard to avoid moving at the next meeting, but they are running themselves out of ammunition. And ultimately, I don't think this is going to be about monetary policy and interest rates. I think the principal financial question people should be concerning themselves with is not the price of credit, but is the quantity of credit, is what's going to be done when, in a sense, economic time has been stopped, but financial time has not been stopped. So airlines that have ongoing debts but aren't going to have willing passengers for a significant period of time. Others who've paid to lay in inventories but aren't going to be able to keep their places of business open because of the virus. I think the question of how we're going to manage the financial distress is a crucial one. And I think that you're going to start to hear, and frankly, I'm going to have sympathy with it, the question raised of when the banks were in trouble, we stepped up and provided a variety of kinds of funding. Shouldn't we find some ways to respond to the businesses that are going to be in distress. And I think that's what the Fed and the Treasury should be thinking about right now.
That's a terribly good point.
And that might be one reason why the Fed felt they needed to do this week, because they weren't seeing action on these other fronts. So might as well to try to do their best to deliver what I think they thought probably would be a dovish surprise, which the Fed likes to do. They like to come out surprise on the dovish side when times are tough. But instead, what you actually saw happen was the 50 basis point rate cut that was priced in for March, that they thought they were preemptively delivering this week, it just got repriced in.
Yeah,
so the market is now demanding essentially that they cut rates to zero.
the choreography was a calamity. I mean, what was the reason for foreshadowing it on Friday, except to assure that you'd create a buy on the rumor, sell on the news situation?
That's a great point.
What was the reason for continuing to have leaks coming out of the system early in the week? I don't see how they could have thought that this was going to be highly effective. The right thing to have done was to have caused people to be in doubt about what would happen, and then perhaps belatedly to deliver something just when people thought you might not do it. I think you also cannot underestimate the challenge of making policy when people think you have more power than you actually do. Yeah. And there's this enormous pressure to act, but if when you act, what you're really going to do is reveal your own weakness, you have to be courageous enough, even when everyone's clamoring for action, not to act.